All right, good evening. We are going to go ahead and get started. Um, Thank you for joining us for tonight's program, Historic Neighborhoods of Indianapolis. Tonight we will be learning about New Augusta, a hidden gem in Northwest Indy. I am Julia Black, and I am the Events and Marketing Coordinator here at the Indianapolis Prop-Am. During the program tonight, please remain on mute throughout the presentation and then type your questions into the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Following the presentation, we'll have about 5 to 10 minutes of Q&A with our speaker. The Prop-Am was founded in 1888 by renowned suffragist and activist May Wright Sewell as a place where women and women's groups could meet and share ideas. We carry on that tradition today through our mission as the place that connects and celebrates women. Our mission focus is women's leadership, arts and culture, and historic preservation. As a nonprofit, we count on your support to provide engaging programming like tonight. Please take a look at our website at www.thepropalam.org for all of our upcoming virtual events and to support the Prop-Am. Our program this evening features New Augusta native Mark Patty. During tonight's program, Mark will lead us on a witty and insightful virtual tour of the historic architecture and preservation efforts of this hidden gem along Indy's northwest side. Mark is a New Augusta native and graduated from Pike High School and IU University. Mark purchased a home in New Augusta in 1988 and has served as president of the New Augusta Village Association for the past 15 years. So without further ado, Mark, I'm going to pass it over to you and we can go ahead and get started.
All right, then. Can you hear me all right? Very
Yes.
good. Julia, thanks to you and the Prop-Am for this invitation. I want to, before we get started with the good stuff, let me make a couple of recommendations. And of course, I've lost that information. Over the course of time, many people have been interested in New Augusta. Indianapolis or Pike, the Pike Historical Society has contributed a lot of information that I gleaned for this presentation, as well as a gal on a website I'll give you at the end. So for some of the historical information, there are better places to go than I would tell you that my folks moved back to New Augusta in 1955. So I have a sense of New Augusta from 55 to about 75. And then in 1988, I bought the Sourwine Todd House, which is a nice home right in the center of town. And so I've got a sense of things since then and can speak to those issues, although I was kind of around for that period. And I think we could make two, before I get into the presentation, if the period from 55 to 75 could be called, if I had to subtitle, I'd call it Mayberry, USA. And from 88 on, it's Indianapolis Comes a Calling. So if that helps a bit. So why don't I try and get started here so we can see all the good stuff in New Augusta. How's that sound, Julia? All right, then. At some point, I know I'm not in the share mode, but I hope you'll bear with me with this. We're having a little bit of trouble with the Zoom. In any case, the sketch that you're seeing there is from the Indianapolis Star in April 1926. A fellow named Polly made that sketch. And he was concerned, even in those days, there were two things I noticed. One, New Augusta was viewed as an interesting little village. And two, Polly commented on he was afraid that there would be a loss of quietude, as he put it, as the big city came our way rather. In 1955, the president of the New Augusta State Bank, Bob Huffman, made a similar claim. He thought that New Augusta would be enveloped by the city. Well, in some ways that's happened, and in some ways it hasn't. And we might ask ourselves why that is. I think there are some factors that have been involved over time. For sure, this community has had a sense of preservation. There's also been a lot of, as time has moved on, thoughtful rehabilitation and restoration. Certainly a sense of community stewardship and also community involvement when it was really necessary. So let's get moving here, shall we? For those of you who may not be familiar with the neighborhood, who are seeing this at a later time perhaps, New Augusta is in the northwest corner of Pike Township in Marion County in Indianapolis in the Mideast or the Midwest, depending on your point of view. So it gives you some perspective. As far as, and I will have to go a little bit over some of the history, and you know what? I've lost my notes on that one, so I'll have to do that from memory as well. This map from 1888, which I hope you're all seeing, shows New Augusta. It also shows Augusta to the east, about a mile to the east. And Augusta was founded in 1832 by a fellow named Boardman. There's a Boardman house that still can be seen on the Michigan Road. All this land was developed in the 50s. It's when things really started going. As you may recall, Indiana was a state in 1816, and most of the action was farther to the south until the 30s and 40s. What you can't see you can also see Traders Point existed, and there was a little place called Snacks, which was around, but that was just about it for Pike Township in 1889. This is one of my favorite maps of New Augusta. It kind of shows you how this thing all got going. The Hornaday and Hosbrook addition is the closest area to the railroad tracks. I forgot to mention that I guess it was the Lafayette and Indianapolis Railroad went through in 1852. And as we developed, there were further additions to the west. But the bulk of that stuff happened after the railroad went through. It was soon after it became part of the Big Four line. And somebody can help me on that later. It's Cleveland, Cincinnati, Chicago, and something else. Yeah, Indianapolis or New Augusta was definitely a railroad community. Lower right, you can see a rather bad day on the Big Four line. I think that derailment happened probably in the 20s. Nothing ever that exciting happened when I was in New Augusta or since. You can see typical iron horse going south to Indianapolis through New Augusta in the upper right. I don't know if I mentioned this or not since I've lost all my notes, but to the left, you see a rail crew, and that tall fellow there is Jacob Wright, my great-grandfather. The Wright family was a railroad family. They either lived in New Augusta or lived down in Acton. And Acton, of course, is also on the Big Four line and one of the two remaining railroad towns in Marion County. One of the things I noticed when I looked at this stuff, I do believe part of the reason that Acton and New Augusta have survived, luck is part of it for sure, but also both of these little towns, villages are surrounded by water on three sides. I think there was a natural boundary there that kind of helped them out a bit. Oops, sorry, guys. Pardon my lack of adroitness. All right, so let's look at some of the architecture and the houses of New Augusta. I'll start the walking tour. Of course, this is a New Augusta depot that a lot of you may have seen as you drove through New Augusta Road. It's a prominent feature. The first railroad depot was built shortly after the railroad went through, and it was on the east side of the tracks, but it burned down and was in the late 1880s. It was replaced in 1890 by the current depot. And an interesting fact, and we've been able to validate this. I don't know about if the Lincoln inaugural train stopped in New Augusta, but the funeral train certainly did. This is one of the most interesting buildings, and there aren't too many depots left in central Indiana. This one's in pretty good shape. Interestingly enough, it's not as big on the inside as it appears to be, due to the way the roof is set up. And what I'm going to do, the New Augusta townscape that remains now is mostly probably New Augusta from 1880 on. I'm going to start with the older homes and go to the west, which will be newer construction. An important part of the New Augusta history is the sour wine Purdy house. I believe it was Dr. Ephraim Purdy came to New Augusta around 1861 from Switzerland County down in Vevey. And his son, Clem, was the father of the Purdy sisters who lived in this house for a good long time. I grew up across the street, and you couldn't have had better neighbors. They were IPS school teachers and totally respected by the folks in New Augusta. It's an interesting, I've always liked to say they sort of ruled with a velvet glove. They were so respected that I don't think anyone would ever oppose any ideas that they had. Years later, and how this preservation thing kind of all got started, the depot was, I don't know, decertified by probably then what was the New York Central Railroad. And there was some thought that it might be destroyed, but the Purdy sisters stepped in and bought the depot, and it's been part of the property ever since. This is probably in the late 60s. Prior to that, there was a telegrapher, and folks occasionally got off the train, and it was just a regular little railroad station. But these ladies knew what preservation was all about. They were definitely interested in the history of New Augusta in a big way and contributed mightily to anything that's happened since. Right across the street from them is the Guthrie home. And I didn't really do a very good job of showing the old part. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, another prominent figure in this whole pastiche is Jacob Sourwine. He built at least 4 homes in New Augusta. The Purdy home was one of them. You can always tell a sour wine home because the stairs went straight up. Even as kids, we didn't mess around with the Purdy steps because treacherous is too nice a comment for those. But anyway, this Guthrie home is also a sour wine home, and you can tell by the steps. What you're seeing here is a great example of the restoration or thoughtful re-additioning. The folks that live there now, that had a small L on it when they bought the property. What you're seeing to the left there is all new construction that matches quite nicely with the front, which was, my brother said it was a 2-room shotgun. It was a very small home. That barn you're seeing is probably the greatest barn built in Marion County in the 21st century. I'd challenge anybody to show me a better one. Built by a couple of fellows, one of whom is my brother and a friend of his, who are very good guys that understand construction and understand old construction. So they've been very helpful on a lot of projects here in town, and actually have done it in a thoughtful way. And I'll say more about that later. But that's actually a huge garage with an upstairs. And I do like the board and batten feature that the folks used. Because most of the homes in New Augusta were board and batten, but of course, as they got renovated, that changed over time. Oh, and I see Sharon Bush Freeland has joined us today, and of course, she's got a nice piece in High Mailbag, and she did if you ever want to know much more about the history of New Augusta, Sharon is all over it in her piece. All right, the Wade Eldeb house, the next slide, is also a sour wine home, and the front of the house that we were just seeing is very similar in its construction. A lot of wide poplar floors and just very cool. Well, things that have lasted 140 years, so built to last for sure. The Purdy sisters, by the way, I don't know exactly what their motives were, but at one time or another, they owned 3 or 4 homes in the New Augusta area, which they bought and improved, and also helped keep things the way they needed to be. And I will tell you as we move forward, and I've lost the history, and that's maybe it'll come to me here in a bit. Oh, darn it. That's disappointing. I lost my train of thought. It'll come back to me. All right. These are homes. The next couple of homes are over on New Augusta Road. And really the oldest part of town was what's now Purdy Street and New Augusta Road. Makes sense, closest to the railroad. The Klingensmith home is a big home right at that little S turn. A lot of walnut in it, as I recall, and it's just a big, nice home that's been renovated over the last 20 years, and folks did a nice job on that. All right, let's see. Now we're going to come to a good example of restoration, and I think fairly pure architecture. The guy in Myers' home sits on New Augusta Road. Whereas many of these homes are what in the term is vernacular, or kind of homes that are a bit of this and a bit of that. This one is really a fairly true Italianate. In the upper left-hand corner there, you can see what it looked like probably 7 years ago. Since that picture was taken, the house has been renovated. It did a really nice job of on the brickwork, which was in pretty rough shape there for a while. Oh, something I forgot to tell you, one of the owners back in the 80s, which this house was built about the 80s, 70s, 80s, was a spiritualist, and we had a seance room. The seance room, I do believe, is in the upper left-hand corner. So if you're any rapping during this presentation, that's probably where it's coming from. I do apologize, folks. Let me get moving here. Keep moving. All right, these homes are also on New Augusta Road. Fairly vernacular homes, the Rodebaugh King and also the Coble Hollingsworth. Nice thing about Coble Hollingsworth, around the corner from that, we didn't get a picture for some reason, was probably the first filling station in the New Augusta area. It sat there for a long time. And you may ask yourself, well, these are fairly plain looking homes. One of the things, and again, I apologize for losing my notes. In 1989, Pike Historical Society nominated New Augusta and did all the paperwork to make the whole village, put it on the National Historic Register, and that was achieved. In 1994 or so, we were approached by the City of Indianapolis Historic Preservation Commission, IHPC, to become a conservation district. The first go around taught us a lot about politics. I won't get into the specifics, but whoever said that a lie goes around the world 3 times before the truth gets its pants on was pretty correct. We had to wait about 5 years after the first attempt to begin a more formal for an organized approach from our end of things. In fact, we petitioned IHPC in that case and did get local historic designation. Long-winded preamble. The reason I mention that is because one of the things the folks said to us about New Augusta is most of the stuff is just country houses, of course, but it's the little village in its totality that they found most interesting. And also the number of outbuildings that are available. And we'll get into that in a bit. In fact, I forgot to mention something. Let me see if I can't sneak back here. There is an advantage to this. The Catterjohns have 2 outbuildings, one of which you see in the upper right-hand corner, one of which they actually imported from another site. On the back side of the old house is a warm kitchen, which was done in brick, and which the current owners retuck pointed themselves and did a really nice job on it. All right, then. So now we're going to move to the other side of town. As things start moving around in the 80s and 90s, 1880s, 1890s, we started getting a little more development to the west. This home on the left, now I'm not sure about if we got our notes right on this or not. Said it was transformed to a Dutch colonial in the 30s. I'm not sure about that. We'd have to do some more research on that. Although it seems to me that would be a fairly unusual design for out in the countryside. One of the fellows that lived there was rumored to be an associate of the most famous tax evader in Chicago in the 30s. I'm sure you know who that is. And I'm not sure if that's true or not, but this is the only house in town that has a slate roof. It had a fountain upstairs and copper downspouts back in the day. The house and it also has a nice barn, as a matter of fact, which we didn't get a picture of. The house on the right is a nice little vernacular home. It was purchased by the Purdy sisters probably in the late 60s. It was sat way too low, so they actually raised the house about 2 concrete blocks worth and did a lot of fill and essentially saved the house from rack and ruin, if you will. And it's a really nice home. Okay, so now we're going to get into, in the 1860s, the business was primarily in the from the railroad. We get to the 1880s and 1890s, you start seeing a little more development in New Augusta. Probably one of the first big buildings, 1890, is the Oddfellows building. Of course, you folks know that, I can't think of the word. There was a lot of organizations like the Masons, the Oddfellows, the Elks, and that was very big at that time. This is their building. It pretty much sits exactly as it was built. I don't think much has, other than the awnings, not much has changed. As the notes indicate, we've had everything. The post office was there for many years, small diner, a meat market, barber shop, electrician. I remember all those things. And of course, there's a nice photo of some of the New Augusta mailmen getting ready to go out and deliver the mail. I'm a little blocked, but I do believe to the right, lower right, that first picture, New Augusta had a centennial in 1955. We do put that as the year that 1855 is the year of the inception of the town. Whether it be, and I forgot to mention this, I apologize, folks. It was Hosbrook and Augusta Station till about 1877, when the post office got a little more involved. Since we had Augusta to the east, Augusta Station, they thought would be confusing, and the town was redubbed New Augusta, and it has been that ever since. And to the right is probably the third or fourth iteration of the town pump. The Oddfellows, we think, put a pump in, and it was a working pump well into the 60s and the early 20th century. This one is strictly architectural in nature. We think it'll be a lot harder to steal than the last one was, but we'll see about that. Next comes, I think, one of the best restoration projects for sure in our little town. The Wagle General Store started out as the first floor was part of the Hopewell Lutheran Church. And in 1880, it was moved to its present location. And there's old Jacob Sourwine again. Second story was added. It became a general store. The Wagle family was involved in it until 1947. Incidentally, my uncle, I think, took over after that. The fellow who owns the Oddfellows building and owned both properties at that time in the 80s is an accountant. Since we were on the historic register, there were, for businesses, not for residences, there were tax advantages and tax credits available for restoration in historically designated sites. The picture on the upper left gives you a good idea of the state of disrepair of that building prior to its renovation. Something you can't really see there is that building had a list of about 15 or 18 degrees. It was really starting to be problematic. In fact, my brother, who is a very good carpenter, felt that the only thing that was really keeping that thing afloat was the lath on this building under the clapboards is put on diagonally. So all those triangles will helping to hold that up. In any case, the gentleman who owns the property got some old school guys that really knew how to do these things right. As you can clearly see in the second picture, they were able to bring it up straight. And I think he might have used hardy plank board on the front. I'm not sure. I don't remember that. But we think it just turned out great. And I hope you all do too. One of the time, I don't generally stick my nose into things, but you'll notice what I would call some Greek revival elements up at the very top. And I had a little chat with the workmen to make sure that was all going to stay. And of course, they assured me it would. So that's a really nice building. Okay, this is a building a house just to the north of the Wagle General Store. One of the bigger houses in town, and part of the reasons because the telephone switchboard was there for a good number of years in the back of the house. The building and some nice, I guess we call that fish scale gingerbread up there at the top. It's a pretty house. This building to the right is one of my favorite outbuildings. I think it might truly be the first garage in New Augusta. Unlike some others that were barns that got reworked, there was actually a pit in there so you could go underneath your Model A or your Model T and do a little mechanical work. Nice building. Yeah, across the street from that house is the gas house. And that was an old schoolhouse that was moved from 71st and Kaufman Road. And Fred Handel, a local carpenter, increased the size of it a bit. Chris Gass, same family, had a blacksmith shop there. There's also a barn in the back and a chicken coop, which are still there today. And there again, the outbuildings, we're very fortunate to still have a lot of those around. And I forgot to mention this, one of thoughtful restoration, one of our current residents, who's also the oldest resident in our town at the moment, bought 3 or 4 homes. I want to say 3 bungalows and the gas house, and did very nice restorations on the inside and outside of those properties. So we've been extremely fortunate to have folks, it occurs, that lived in the community and were willing to, I guess, take the risk to renovate these properties, and just did a really nice job. In fact, I will say in a lot of ways, New Augusta looks a lot better now than it ever has. As a kid growing up, all of these homes were painted white. And of course, that's not the case anymore. We've gotten a little more interesting in our color palette. The McDonald House at 72nd and Dobson Street, Victorian stick style. And Dr. McDonald was one of the first physicians in New Augusta. Dr. Coble might have been the first, I'm not sure, but there were, well, Dr. Ephraim Purdy might have been the first, then Coble, then McDonald, then Asher, father and son, who actually both of them saw me as a patient a long time ago. And we hated getting shots because in those days, I think they used those needles over and over again. Okay, the Klingensmith Fink House is on Dobson Street. Originally, this is interesting, and speaking to the fact that I think the Hoosiers in the day were careful with their money. This house originally faced the alley. It had 2 rooms. It was rotated and additions put on. One of the things I wish we hadn't done so much of, you'll see the brick porch. A lot of these brick porches, I think, were added in the, I want to say 30s, probably the 30s is my guess. And we lost a lot of wooden porches, I think. In this case, the current owner's done a nice job with their painting. When you mute those down a little bit, they're not quite as obvious, I think. The building to the right is a warm kitchen. I don't think we got a perspective on it, really. It's a little taller and a little narrower. It's a really nice little building. Coming up next is one that some of you folks have probably seen because it's on 71st Street. This is a tremendous restoration. The Hessen Schmidt House. The upper left shows what the house looked like probably in the early 60s. That came from a Pike Historical Society pamphlet that they did on 100-year-old houses in Pike Township. I'll call your attention to the very top, the spire, if you will, the turret. On the left is pretty much I just want to say a cube. Cube's not the right word. I'm losing my mind here. Fairly straight up and down. This property was bought by a fellow, I want to say in the 80s, Joe Schmidt, who no longer lives there. And a classic story, he and his wife put an apartment upstairs, little apartment, and worked on that house for several years to bring it back to its present glory. Actually, I believe Miss Freeland was correct. In our notes here, we say it's East Lake. That's more of a generic term. I think she called it Queen Anne, and I'm going to go with that. In any case, it's our only painted lady, and I think we'd all agree a fabulous restoration. The Day Muir House on just across the street from the Joe Schmidt house. Nice little house with a nice barn in the lower right. Moving a little farther to the west, we get to our next building, the Hosbrook Lodge, Masons, I think. I hope I'm right on that. That building was built in 1905. It's, I believe what did they call that? Well, I'm not seeing the style. Might have been Romanesque Revival. I can't recall, I'm sorry. That was also had like the Oddfellows building, upstairs was their meeting hall. Downstairs, they had businesses. The new Augusta State Bank, which was in force from 1911 to 1963, was there. That's not my uncle in the upper left. That would be Russell Clark, a known Dillinger associate, who was alleged to have robbed the bank in 1927. I mentioned Bob Huffman earlier. He was a World War II veteran, had his revolver with him in the bank. I don't know if he shot at Russell or if he shot at the next guy that tried to rob the bank and was unsuccessful. But I do know the shots were fired because as a kid, when I went in there, you could see the bullet holes in the teller's cage. And this has currently been purchased by another individual and is being renovated on the inside. And we're very excited about that. Okay, let's see, where I am. I'm sorry, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Okay. Right across the street from that lodge is the Todd House. There are actually two Todd houses, the Sourwine Todd and the Todd House. The Todds owned both of those homes at one time. And I think that's a nice, the upper left-hand corner again shows you that picture in the what the building looked like in the late 60s, early 70s. Very thoughtful renovation on that done by my brother and his associate or boss. We'll have to get to them on that one. Daryl. That house, the little area there to the left, that shed was literally tacked on there. When we got in there and started renovating one time, you could see that they had two sets of 2x4s. So they just brought it up and nailed it together. A lot of leaking problems. So the fellows added a new gable and totally reworked the roof lines on that. And I think if you'll drive by there, and I urge all you to come visit us, you can't tell if it was done 5 years ago or 105 years ago. A really nice job on that one. Okay. Here we have the Sourwine Todd House, in which I've had the privilege of being the steward of since about 1988. Jacob Sourwine, again, the builder. He's getting better on his steps, but there's still, you still have to pay attention. We don't have a good picture of it, but there's a little building to the northwest corner that was, in fact, I'm sitting in this addition now that I think was put in as an office with lap siding. Really a classic case, though. This building had been in the same family for most of its existence, so it had been very well cared for. When I took over the property, there wasn't anything that needed to be done immediately. And so I could sort of carefully take one project after another with Daryl and Kevin's help. The garage that you see on your right, my garage now, started out as a barn. The area that you're seeing is all poplar, and it was a barn. Later, another room was added with a kind of a shed lean roof. The previous owner, the fellow I purchased the property from, reworked the roof line on this building and really did a nice job. So there again, all we had to do when we kind of took a look at the garage was rework the concrete on it. And it was a big project, but just stuff that needed to be fixed after 100 years. And then we started calling it the carriage house after we put a little money in there. And there again, here's one of the icons of our little village, the Salem Lutheran Church. Klingensmith's a name that I didn't bring up much, but they're prominent in the history of Pike Township and the New Augusta area. And a Lutheran church started in 1833. It had a couple of different locations, one of which was down at, I think, New Augusta Road and 71st Street. But in 1887, they undertook to build this fine church, and it really is a fine little church. I don't know where I saw this. I don't think it was in Sharon's article, but at some point it was thought to be the best church north of the real city of Indianapolis, which is 10th Street or maybe 16th Street at the time. They did some remodeling in 1912. I think the spire's always been there, but they added the glass stained roofs. You may see the Y2 doors. That was part of the walking tour that we did, which some of you I think were on. And I do get a kick out of that. Back in the day, the guys went in one door, the ladies went in another. That's not the case any longer. Couple of additional homes, Pollard House, nice addition. This was actually an office for most. Dr. Asher's office was an office for the entire time he was working there. We got lucky again. Another neighbor bought this property when it was available and refinished or continued furnished the upstairs. And it's currently a residence, and we hope that will be the case. Fox Shaw House on Pollard Street, a nice old farmhouse. I think the gal that lives there now did a nice job with her paint scheme. It diminishes the size of, or the brick on that wraparound porch. She also has a barn. All right, then, let's see. This is the New Augusta Gym, which is currently at Kaufman Road and 73rd Street. It was originally school number 6, and that's the picture you see in the upper left-hand corner. I'm pretty sure those kids that are hanging out of the windows on the second story didn't sign a waiver or anything, but that's for a long time ago. Later, I guess it was 1990, according to my notes here. They reworked the top, made it into a gym, and the gym floor is still in there, even though it's now in an industrial business kind of thing. And the school was moved to the east. In fact, that was New Augusta High School until maybe Pike High School, and I don't know, late 30s, early 40s. The conventional wisdom is 1941. All right, now we've got, this is just, we had some pictures we liked, but couldn't put them anywhere. Again, as I said, the conservation district, local designation, which allows us to police what's going on in our district now in a more formal manner. These are two of the outbuildings actually in the house I grew up in. And I always liked those buildings. I actually like them a little better than the house. You can also see a nice picture that was just a nice picture of Salem at dusk. 72nd Street, when the snow's fallen and not much else has happened. One of the things the Purdy sisters or others did was use spirea as a shrub. That's Van Houten or bridalry spirea you see on your left. And even to this day, if you drive down Purdy Street in May, it's a very nice sight. These other two structures in the low side are new buildings that have been built over time, but it's all about the roof line and the angle. Steeper the better from our standpoint. And those folks did a nice job. In one case, we asked them not to tear down that shed, and they did. And IHPC prevailed upon them. That would be the left-hand picture, prevailed on them to put a shed up. And in the other case, a building burned down and was replaced. A barn was replaced by a new barn. Did a nice job on it. So that's all my pictures. Let me kind of backtrack a little bit. We're very happy to have the local designation through IHPC, even though it was hard to get. I was informed by that petitioning of the city in an important event that happened about 2007 to 10. We were able to close the road at 72nd Street at New Augusta Road. For those of you who are familiar with the area, we were getting a terrible amount of cut through traffic. So much so I was able to get a traffic study as president, just by dumb luck, really found it when I was downtown one day. And those traffic studies are hard to read, but I was able to determine that essentially everyone who was going west from New Augusta Road was cutting through New Augusta. I don't think we would exist as the village that we are now without that closure. We were able, since I'd gone to school on that, others did the heavy lifting on the preservation petition. I knew what we were able to present a petition that was fairly bulletproof from a legal standpoint. And with the help of the city, IHPC, and actually Pike Township Residents Association, who fully supported us, we were able to get that permanent road closure. And not only has it helped the west side of New Augusta, which is the bulk of the area, but it's also, I think, slowed down the amount of traffic on New Augusta Road, although it's still heavily traveled. Our long-term, our big hope, you folks, I don't know if you're familiar with Pike enough to know, there's a right-of-way that would be Guyan Road or Payne Road that goes from 71st to 79th. If that ever is built, that will change traffic flow in Pike Township fairly dramatically. All right, so let me give you some quick, I know we're about to run out of time here, lost artifices, if you will. New Augusta Grain and Supply was just north of of my house on the railroad tracks until the early 60s when it burned down. Pike and Traders Point, I think, were really the centers of, or New Augusta and Traders Point with their co-op centers of agribusiness. And this was when the guys were bringing in the harvest back in the 50s and 60s, it was a booming, to be sure. An old picture of the Wagle General Store from the 40s, probably, I think, 30s or 40s. The one thing we didn't have a picture of was Klingensmith's General Store. Talk about dumb luck. A friend of mine was at a way station, noticed, oh, I think they want me to get rid of me. Here's a postcard that was found that should be in the dump. So that's what Klingensmiths looked like in late 30s. This is a watercolor I found at an auction of New Augusta that was done by a fellow named Ed Bruckner, who often brought his kids out to paint Klingensmith's General Store, which was painted bright orange. So with that, I'll say that's about it and see what Julia's got for me. And I do have some links that'll be on YouTube. You can find those.
Thank you, Mark.
Yes, ma'am.
If you want to go ahead and stop sharing your screen, we'll all come
Oh,
back together and do some
sure.
questions.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry I lost my notes, folks. Good thing I thought about this a bit. All right, there we go.
All right, so one question we have in the chat. What were some of the roadblocks to getting the conservation district?
Well, as I said, frankly, well, there were a couple of things. Ours is a conservation district. That's different than you folks. Some of the folks that are here today, I think, are in preservation districts. Less intense. It's all about the community and the fronts of buildings and the way things look. As I said, we had one gentleman who stood in our way the first time and really went around talking about stuff that wasn't true. Had nothing to do with what was going to be the case. But it is amazing. Once that stuff gets out, it's hard to get it out of folks' heads. So that stopped us the first time. Really, once we got organized the second time, and we've had a New Augusta Civic Association, and we've kind of morphed into the New Augusta Village Association, a lot of the same folks. We got organized and got our ducks in a row, and maybe the IHPC guys had a little better understanding of what the conservation districts were all about in the 5 years that sort of elapsed, because I do believe Ransom Place might have been the first conservation district. And we certainly are a conservation district. It's more about the feel of the place. I hope I'm answering your question. But the second time, frankly, our opposition just caved, and I was very disappointed in them. So it was fairly smooth sailing after that. But it is an arduous process, and you got to get 75%, which means that you got to get with everybody. And I remember I met people because they wouldn't take a position. The last couple, three, man, I kept knocking on those doors, and some we got and some we didn't.
Yeah, well, good for you for accomplishing that. Doesn't sound easy. Okay, next question is, do any of the Purdy sister descendants still live in New Augusta?
Not so. Still in Indianapolis. They still own the property. Those of you may have seen, they ran actually through Landmarks. They marketed the property, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago. So it's being rented to a friend of the current owner at the moment. Long term, of course, we would be extreme. Something I forgot to mention because I lost my notes. I think folks in this town have always had a vision that houses should be houses, business should be businesses. We've gotten in trouble and had to remonstrate when guys wanted to do something other than that. The conservation district has a similar vision and changes that. So as I said, the more people that are owners, the more ownership you have in a community, the better off you are for sure. So long-term would be delighted. And the house and the depot are one property, and they are both zone D3 for those that might be interested.
All right, and then one last question for you, Mark. I'm curious, what do you think makes New Augusta unique compared to other historic neighborhoods here in Indianapolis?
Well, I'm not an expert on the downtown ones, although I've been to a lot of them. I think it's a different environment in the sense that, we're a little railroad town in 1855. Well, I think Augusta was situated where it was because it was 2 carriage rides from downtown. I think the toll house was one. I think I'm pretty close on my geography there. So we're out in the sticks. And very much agribusiness and I mean, it's farming. My brother, I knew, as I'm fond of saying, I know who was on my star route and how to get to Pike High School. My brother still calls areas in Pike by the farm names because he's a Purdue guy. Okay, whatever. And he's interested in farms. I not so much. So the development was just different. I mean, y'all are highfalutin downtown. We're just, we're, country mice out here. And the development was different. And frankly, as I thought about it, maybe like Madison, one of the reasons historic Madison is the way it is because nobody had any money. So they didn't mess with their homes. It might have been similar out here in the 40s and 50s. Folks were careful with their money. And they didn't do anything that couldn't be undone, and they owned their own homes, so they didn't mess them up. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for your presentation tonight, and thank you everyone for joining us. I just want to announce we have a few upcoming programs in April. On Wednesday, April 13th, that's the second Wednesday of the month, from 2 to 4 p.m., we're going to have our April Prop Day social, and that will be in person at the Propileum. And then on Friday, April 22nd at 6 p.m., the final speaker in our 2021-2022 Maryland Keglick Women's Enrichment Series will feature Ashley C. Ford, who is the author of Somebody's Daughter. So we hope to see you guys at our upcoming programs. Thank you for joining us, and have a great week.
May I throw in one last thing, and I'll be gone too?
Sure.
Thanks for all of you who are attending. If you haven't been to New Augusta, we often hear, I never knew you were here. Well, we're still here. Come out and see us.
Thank you, Mark.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks to everybody.